Good afternoon. Once again, I'm Carrie Healy, and I'm the Director of Admissions and Financial Aid here at Commonwealth. Thanks again for joining us this afternoon and for sticking with me as we chat a little bit about the admissions process. One of the questions we usually get right out of the gate is, what does our committee hope to see in applicants? What are we looking for? As you probably gathered during one or both, hopefully, of our first couple of sessions, we're looking for students who are engaged, intellectually curious, creative, kind, inclusive, students who will get involved, challenge each other's opinions, pursue their interests, try new things, and truly engage with our community, both the Commonwealth community and the broader community. So to that end, we're looking for students with different interests. Our kids have many different passions and new and budding interests. There isn't sort of one typical Commonwealth student. We're really seeking students from a wide range of backgrounds who can bring themselves to our community. Just to give you a sense, our current students attended 85 different schools, and those schools include public charter, independent, parochial. A few of our kids have homeschool backgrounds. Our students come from 46 different towns this year, so pretty wide geographic spread. 35% of them have financial aid grants. 48% of our students identify as students of color. Our students practice a number of different religions. They bring traditions from a pretty wide range of cultural backgrounds, and they speak at least 12 languages at home. And that's everything from Japanese to Norwegian. So how does the committee determine fit once we have this applicant pool? So we do so on a few different levels. The interactions we have with students during interviews and during the day visits help us get a sense of academic, personal, and social cultural fit. Recommendations also shed light on fit. Even though we think we get to know students pretty well throughout the course of the process, we're not in the classroom with them every day. So being able to draw on their own teachers' understanding of how they participate in class, what kind of work they do, how they interact with classmates, that's really important in giving us a well-rounded sense of each applicant. The other aspects of academic fit, of course, include how a student is doing in school, which we can get a sense of through a transcript, standardized testing, as well as writing assessments that students do during their day visit at Commonwealth. And I'll get back to that in a moment. So one of the things that I think is really special about Commonwealth is the extent to which our teachers participate in the process. So teachers at every school are involved with admissions. But what I found at Commonwealth is they are incredibly engaged in just about every phase of our process. So we have teachers on our admissions committee who conduct interviews, who typically meet students at admission fairs and for school visits. They welcome students into their classrooms as part of our own day visits. So they're getting to know students in our applicant pool on a day-to-day basis once those visits start. And they help us evaluate writing samples and applications. So we're really able to draw on their expertise when we're thinking about a student's fit with Commonwealth. You know, I've been in admissions this is my 13th year, but I'm not a classroom teacher. So being able to work with colleagues on our admissions committee who can really tap into a student's strengths and potential, I think really sharpens our ability to consider fit. So how do you go about applying if all of this sounds good to you? So we use Ravenna like a lot of our peer schools. We really hope that the Ravenna platform makes things easier for families. On the recommendation front, for example, many of the schools in the Boston area use Boston shared forms. So rather than approaching a teacher with a bunch of different recommendation links, they would complete one, perhaps with a couple of supplemental questions that are school specific. But we really hope it streamlines things for schools and for teachers as well as families. The next step would be, and actually you can do this even before the Ravenna application, is to schedule an online interview. So we are using Zoom for these interviews this year. A member of our admissions committee would chat with the student first, and then with a parent or guardian. So the whole thing will usually take around 45 to 50 minutes total. You may have seen our virtual tour on our website. We'll send out a more robust version of that tour right before the interview. So hopefully you can take a look prior to chatting with an admissions committee member. I alluded to the day visit or the visit to virtual Commonwealth. In more ordinary times, we would have students visit us in person during a school day. Since that is not an option at this point, we're inviting students to visit our online classes. So that visit will include a couple of virtual class visits, usually 9th and 10th grade level courses. Students will complete 2 writing assessments, and that is instead of essays they write on their own. So that's included in that day visit as well. They'd also get to come to all school meeting, our what we call recess. We have that every day virtually, and it's a great way to get a sense of school life. And they can also have lunch with a student host and with any other students who happen to be visiting that day as well. So we host these visits until the beginning of February. And the interview would take place first. We do require an online application before setting up that virtual day visit. So that's the order of operations there. So what should we submit as part of this application? I mentioned the Ravenna form. Our application form is very, very short. Mostly because we have the students do their essays as part of the visit. So they're not working on application essays independently. And I should note too that those writing assessments, we want them to be interesting and engaging. We really feel like exposing students to the kind of work they might see at Commonwealth, getting a sense of how they approach a prompt, getting just a true sense of their writing, really gives us an opportunity to learn a lot about them, as opposed to a more polished essay that they may spend hours and hours on. So we found that works, that having them write during the day visit works really well for us. And for students as well, because they finish the visit and they don't have to think about it anymore. So the application, very quick, breezy. I mentioned the transcript earlier. We ask for 2 years of transcripts. If a student's applying for 9th grade, and particularly if that student goes to a 6th through 8 middle school, a lot of schools will send 3 years worth of transcripts, so starting in 6th grade, and that's just fine. We're happy to take a look at anything we get, but we only require transcripts from 2019, 2020, and 2020, 2021, so 2 years worth. And I wanted to just say that I can understand if there's a little bit of concern about what transcripts might look like this year. We're all operating differently, and many schools are engaged in online learning. Some schools have made the decision not to grade students, to operate on a pass-fail basis as opposed to giving them letter or number grades. I just want to offer a little bit of reassurance that our admissions committee is incredibly comfortable evaluating all kinds of transcripts, even when times are more regular. We have students who come from schools always that do not give grades at all, that instead provide a more qualitative evaluation where we're reading teacher comments instead of looking at grades. We have students who come from schools that always do pass-fail grading. So even if a transcript might sort of look and feel different, rest assured that we know how to look at it, we know how to understand it, and it certainly would not put your student at a disadvantage to not have more traditional grades as they might in other times. In terms of the recommendations, we ask for 3, English, math, and then someone in a more administrative position. And that person is going to vary depending on the kind of school a student attends. So it might be a guidance counselor, it could be a principal. If you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out. While we offer a personal recommendation as an option, it's certainly not required. So I suggest considering a personal recommendation only if there's someone you or your student thinks could offer some additional kind of feedback from a slightly different lens. So maybe it's a music instructor, if that's a real interest, or a Boy Scout troop leader. So please don't feel like you need to submit a personal recommendation, but we're happy, again, to read anything that comes our way. And just a quick note about the timing of recommendations, because sometimes that's a question. I usually recommend that families think about approaching schools for recommendations in November at some point. This year, just given the kind of craziness of the start of the school year, I think aiming for sort of after Thanksgiving, maybe even at the beginning of December, I think that will give teachers enough time to feel like they've started to get to know the student, if that's the first time teaching them. But it also gives them enough lead time before the holidays and our February 1 deadline for those recommendations. And I should say too that if you're working with a placement counselor at your child's school, or you're working with a consultant, they might have completely different advice about recommendations. They may handle the whole thing. So of course, follow their guidance. But in the event that you don't have that kind of support, I figured it was worth putting my 2 cents out there. In terms, I mentioned the writing samples already, so that's not something that you would have to submit, but it's something that we would have as part of your student's application. And then standardized test scores, which is another piece I know that is pretty different this year, and may not be as kind of straightforward as they were in the past. So we recommend that students register and attempt to take a test no later than a January test date. Some students plan on taking it more than once, so doing so in the earlier fall, and then perhaps selecting a January date as well. I encourage you to check our website for the different options. The most popular will be the computer-based SSAT at home. That is primarily available to domestic applicants. The advantage there of the at-home test is that there are many more dates being offered than there would be in other years. So there is a little bit more flexibility there. There's also the opportunity for students to take a computer-based test at a Prometric test center. So if you go on, if that's of interest, and you go on to the ssat.org website, you can get a sense of whether there's a Prometric center near you. International applicants, it's a little trickier for you all. The options for you are going to differ depending on where you're located. I encourage you and anyone else to get in touch with us if you can't access a test or if you're having trouble scheduling one or completing one. Please feel free to reach out. We certainly don't want the standardized testing and barriers there to prevent a student from considering Commonwealth and applying to this school.